Elie Grunhaus. I was born in Israel. I sometimes refer to myself as a Southerner because I was born in the Negev, in the southern part of Israel. So, and I came to the United States. My parents immigrated to the United States when I was 3 years of age. And so as you can imagine, I have just a few memories of my life in Israel. I do remember some things, but most of my life was spent living in New York City. And my parents met in a Siberian labor camp during World War II. I'm Jewish, my parents are Jewish, and everything about my life has been Jewish. And so I grew up in a very Jewish home, a traditional home, not religiously Jewish, but very traditionally Jewish. We ate Jewish foods and that kind of thing. So I'm steeped in that. And like I said, I grew up for the first 3 years of my life in Israel, came to the United States in 1953, and grew up for most of my life in New York City. And it's been an interesting life because I came to know Jesus, Yeshua, as my Messiah when I was 23 years old in the Army. And that has been quite an adventure for me. Let me give you a short little background because that plays in a lot to what I'm about to tell you. If you don't know this, you won't really know the context of what I'm going to say. Mm-hmm. Like I said, my parents are Jewish, but my father was born. They were both born in Poland. And my mother was born and raised in the main city, the capital city of Poland, called Krakow. And my father was born and raised 150 miles away in the city called Siedlce. They never knew one another until they met in a Siberian labor camp in World War II. On September the 1st, 1939, the Nazis did what's called a blitzkrieg. They suddenly attacked Poland, various cities in Poland, including Krakow and Siedlce. And during that time, a lot of chaos broke out, as you can imagine. Many people died, cities burning, the Nazis were invading, and my father was 19 at the time, and my mother was 17 at the time. Like I said a moment ago, they never knew one another. I mean, they lived 150 miles away. But each of their parents were elderly, both my mother's parents and my father's parents. They told them to run. Run. Imagine you're 19 or 17 years of age, and your parents tell you to run. Where are you going to run? Where are you going to go? So it's like you going home and saying, well, the so-and-so is invading Murray, Kentucky. Run, Jack. Yeah. Where are you going to run? So, but my father and my mother ran. They wanted their parents to join them. They didn't want to run there. They didn't want to leave their parents. But their parents told them that they're too old, and they were. They were late. I mean, they were like in their 60s, 70s. And so they couldn't follow them. And so they ran. My father and my mother, they ran. My mother, and by the way, they're telling me all this when I was around 7 or 8 years of age. I was, like I said a moment ago, I was raised in New York City. I was born in Israel. But they wanted me to know what their life was like. It was important to them that they communicate to me what happened. And I myself was very curious. I wanted to know also. So they held nothing back to me. And this is important. This plays in more to what I'm going to share with you in just a minute. That's why I want to emphasize their background, my background. So they shared all this with me when I was around 7 or 8. So my mother was, like I said, born and raised in Krakow. And she ran when the Nazis attacked in September of 1939. And she was caught by the invading Russians. And, it's not like here in the United States. Here in the United States, you don't need documents. You don't need papers to show who you are. Well, you need a license, a driver's license, I suppose. You do. But there, during that time, 1939, you needed documentation to prove that you were not a spy, okay? My mother had no documents, nothing. So the invading Russians needed people to work in their bomb factories. It was a great excuse. You don't have documentation, you must be a spy. In Russian, there's the word shpion. Shpion, it means spy. You're a shpion, you're a spy. Let's take you. And we're going to put you on a train, and we're going to send you to Novosibirsk, which is Siberia. And there, in Russian, there is a collective farm. The word is nachalnik. And so she was placed on this collective farm to work there. It was a collective farm transformed into a bomb-making factory. And so she put on a train, put there. My father, 150 miles away in Shedlitz, he also ran. But unfortunately, his fate was a little different. When you're running, what the Nazis did, their first priority was to catch Jews. They wanted to get the Jews. And so what they did was they told the Polish people, look, we're having rations, food rations. You want to eat? You tell us where the Jews are. And so when people ran, my father grew up there in Shedlitz. He was friends with many people, both Jews and non-Jews. But when the Nazis attacked, the non-Jews, the Poles, said, we need to eat. So here's a bunch of Jews that we know. We can get rations. We can make some money. Turn them in. And that's what happened with my father. People that he knew, that he grew up with, that he was friends with, played games with, they turned on him. One of them said, look, there's a Jew. Said that to a Nazi soldier there, walking the streets there in Shedlitz. And they arrested him, and they put him on a train heading to the Nazi concentration camp called Auschwitz. Auschwitz. You probably have heard of Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen, whatever. So he was on this train heading towards Auschwitz. He managed to escape from the train, which was interesting. I don't know if you want me to go into that, but because I don't know how much time there is here. but he managed to escape from the train. And he was eventually caught by the Russians. And just like what happened with my mother, the Russians asked him, do you have documents? And of course, he had nothing. So he said, you're a spion, you're a spy. So they took him also on a train, also to Novosibirsk, to Siberia. And that's where my parents met. There in the Siberian labor camp. And by the way, being in Siberia, I mean, they had guards guarding the camp, but not a whole lot. Where are you going to go? I mean, you're surrounded by ice and snow. Where are you going to run? So my father tells me the story that there were 3 men there in the labor camp that escaped. They went off. It wasn't hard because you had guards, but they really weren't guarding people that much. But these 3 men ran away, and they were found 2 weeks later, or at least whatever was left of them was found 2 weeks later. The wolves were out there too, okay? And they were hungry. And so the wolves found them, and there wasn't much left of them. So it's that kind of environment, You have guards, but it really wasn't that big of a deal because where are you going to run? About the best place to be was right there in the labor camp because you got some food. It was slave labor, but at least you ate. Anyway, but my parents, like I said, were met there in the labor camp. And my brother was born. My brother, his name is Henrik. His Polish name is Henrik. And he was born there in the labor camp. And I wasn't born until, 1950 in Israel. But so my parents stayed there in the labor camp till the war ended in 1945. And after the war ended, everyone was let go. My parents first, as you can imagine, my parents wanted to know what happened to their parents. And so they made their way back to Poland. And so they tried to find out, and they found out that both their parents, my mother's and my father's, were murdered in Auschwitz, along with millions of others. And so they were murdered in Auschwitz. And at that point, where do you go? What do you do? Although the war ended, it was still very dangerous there in Poland. People sometimes think that 6 million Jews died in the Nazi concentration camps, and the war ended in 1945. All the persecution is over. Wrong. There was a lot of it. Many Jews were murdered after the war ended because there was a lot of anti-Semitism. Many people hated the Jews. Doesn't matter whether the Nazis were there or not. Nazis were no longer in power, but there were many Nazis that had hid in civilian clothes. Okay? And the Nazis were evil, but they weren't stupid. They realized that they would be caught. So they wore civilian clothes. They mingled in with the rest of the people. And there were many citizens who hated the Jews. Okay? It wasn't just people in the military. There were many, many Germans, many Poles, many Ukrainians that hated the Jews. There were many that did not. There were many that sacrificed their lives to help the Jews. Okay? Many of them. But but there were many that hated them. So anti-Semitism was still rampant. It was dangerous to be a Jew, even when the war ended. So my parents made a decision to immigrate. They needed to immigrate, either to immigrate to New York City or to go to Israel. They chose Israel. And they went there. I was born, like I said, in the Negev town of Serafant. They're in Israel, in the Negev, and I lived there for 3 years. Life was hard. Life was really hard. 1948, Israel became a nation, and it was 2 years between 1948 and 1950. Conditions were real difficult. My father tried to find work. He did, but it was very hard, very, very hard. So in 1953, when I was 3, my parents decided to immigrate to the United States. And with the help of some relatives who had escaped the Nazi Holocaust, they had gone to New York City prior to Hitler attacking Poland. And so with the help of these relatives, primarily there in New York City, they helped my parents and my brother, who was 4 years old, and myself to immigrate to the United States. So we went there to New York, and I was raised there in New York City. And like I said a few minutes ago, we lived in a very traditional Jewish home. My parents, because of their background, because of the war, because of all the atrocities that they saw, Jack, my parents had no religious inclination, okay? That's why I mentioned all this about my background. My parents couldn't stand anything about God, about any God, Jewish God, non-Jewish God, anything about religion. They said, forget it. There is no God. My parents saw so much hate, such atrocities. I told you a few minutes ago, when I was 7 or 8, my parents shared with me. These days, you try to be careful with the young children. You don't want to tell them stories about really horrendous, horrific things that people can do, cruel things that people can do to others. You try to spare them, and for good reason. But I was 7 or 8. At that time, people weren't that careful. My parents held nothing back. They told me. They were very blunt. They told me what they saw. Unbelievable. I mean, just unbelievable. I'm not going to go into it, but it was absolutely horrific. The stuff that we read about in the paper that happened in Israel a year ago on October 7, 2023, when Hamas attacked, and over 1,200 Israelis were murdered. Children being young babies being put into an oven, women being raped, people just being murdered. It was at least as bad what my parents told me, what they saw. It's just crazy. Anyway, because of that background, my parents had no liking, no inclination to anything with religion. Traditionally, they were very Jewish. They didn't want my brother and myself to forget that we're Jews. They didn't want that. But anything to do with religion, get out of here. Don't talk to me about that garbage. This becomes important because later on, I became a Messianic Jew. And as you can imagine, my parents went ballistic, absolutely ballistic, when they found out that their son, myself, became a Messianic Jew. I'm telling you, it was horrible. Anyway, but I grew up in, like I said, a very traditional Jewish home, but non-religious. But even so, and I can't explain why, Jack. I really have maybe you would know why. I don't know why. Even though I grew up in a very non-religious home, where the only mention of God was as a form of a curse word. GD this and GD that. Nothing about praise God or worship God. Nothing. That was garbage to my parents. I grew up in that environment. So why is it, I'm asking you, why is it that a small child growing up in that kind of a home would start praying to God? I would do this a lot. And I grew up in Far Rockaway, okay, which is like a suburb of Queens, New York. And I mean, it's a lovely place, okay, location-wise, because it's right near the ocean. We had a 22-mile stretch of boardwalk there. It paralleled the Atlantic Ocean. And I would often, as a child, and where we lived in a home just about a 10-minute walk away. Not 10-minute drive, 10-minute walk from the beach. And I would often, as a child, walk there to the beach. I'm talking 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I would walk there. And I would take my bicycle and I would bike on the 22-mile stretch of boardwalk. Awesome. And I would often pray to God. Why? Why? Why would I pray to God? I had no clue. It's not like I read the Bible or none of that garbage. We never had a Bible at home. Who talks about God? Who talks about the Bible? Forget it. I had nothing. Zero. And yet, there I am, praying to God. Not Jesus. The word Jesus never entered my head, okay? None of this. Just God. And I felt God was hearing me, was listening to me. Again, I can't explain it. And by the way, I never told my parents, never, because I knew what would happen if I did. They hated anything about God. You know, how can there be a God if God would allow all this cruelty and horrific stuff that would happen? Their own parents dying, murdered, being burned in the ovens there at Auschwitz. How could there be a God? But I prayed often. And I felt, like I said a moment ago, I felt that God somehow heard me. I don't know why. I have no clue why. And so I grew up in that environment. Excuse me. And I even went to Hebrew school, okay? My parents, like I said, they were traditional. They wanted me to study for my bar mitzvah, son of the covenant. That's what it means, bar mitzvah. And they wanted me to study for that because it's tradition. And so I did. And be honest with you, and I hope this doesn't go any further, although I guess you're videotaping this, so maybe it will, I don't know. But I cared nothing about what the rabbis told me in Hebrew school. Okay? I was bored, absolutely bored. I couldn't wait to get out of that Hebrew school. Okay? The rabbis talked to me about nothing, of course, nothing about the New Testament, everything about, the Tanakh, the Old Testament, about Moses and about Joshua and Abraham and stuff like that, Adam and Eve, Genesis. And I cared nothing for it. It was absolute boring, just, it was boredom. And yet, I kept praying to God. I don't know why. And so that's the environment I grew up in. Then I went to college, okay, at Brooklyn College in Brooklyn, New York. I remember there in college, there was a group of Christians called Navigators. I don't know if you ever heard of them or not, but Navigators, they're an organization that go around the different universities and they share the gospel of Christ and that kind of thing. Well, one day I was going to college there, and there were these group of navigators there in the entranceway into Brooklyn College. And they were handing out these gospel tracts, little Gideon's Bibles and stuff like that. They were handing them. They would hand me a gospel tract. I tore it up. I threw it away. I said, this is garbage. I'm Jewish. What do I have to do with this crap? Okay? They gave me a Gideon's Bible. I didn't throw that away. I kept it. I don't know why I kept it. I brought it home with me. I stuck it in a closet. Every now and then I'd take it out. I'd open it up. And in it, in the little Gideon's Bible, all it has is the New Testament, and it's got Psalms and Proverbs. It doesn't have anything with the Old Testament. It's just a little Gideon's Bible. Every now and then I would open it up and I'd read a Psalm or a proverb. Every now and then I'd even sneak a look at the Gospel of John. I said, what is that? It was absolute nonsense. In the first chapter of the Gospel of John, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Nonsense. What is that? Just stupid. I put it back in the closet, forget about it. And every now and then I turn on the TV at home, and there was like these preachers I'd run across. And I'd listen to them for a few minutes. And again, it meant nothing to me. I felt, this is stupid, ridiculous. I turned it off. That was in my college years, okay? 1972, I graduated from Brooklyn College. Got my degree in math. I also majored in physics and in computer science. And during that time, Vietnam War was going on, was raging, Vietnam. But around 1972, when I graduated, the war was beginning to die down. More soldiers were coming home than were being sent there. But it was still a dangerous place. A lot of people came home in body bags from Vietnam. So after graduating, I got a job on Wall Street there in New York City. And I came home one day from work, and my parents, my mother was very quiet, and she handed me a letter, thin letter, and in it said, "Congratulations, you have been drafted into the Army." So, I knew my time to go into the military was there, and I had to do it. A lot of people during that time were running away. My age, I was 22. A lot of people were running away to Canada, but I didn't feel I should do that. I did not want to do that. My parents were concerned. They were concerned I would go to Nam. I would go to Vietnam. And I was concerned too. And I remember walking on the beach and on the boardwalk. And I was again praying to God. I was 22. I was praying to God. And this was a little different, Jack, because this time I was praying to God, God, what's going to happen to me? What, I didn't know. And I felt for the first time ever in my life, God actually talking to me. It wasn't an audible voice. I didn't hear anything. But in my mind, I heard the words, you, meaning me, you will be transformed. What? Who's thinking this? I'm not thinking this. I'm praying to God. God, I'm scared. I didn't know what's going to happen. I got this job in Wall Street. I'm working there. Now I got this, I'm going into the military. What's going to happen to me? All of a sudden in my head, clear as a bell, you will be transformed. It stopped me. I was walking on the boardwalk at the time. And it stopped me right there in my tracks. What? It was just that one sentence, clear as a bell. And I went home, and I don't know why, Jack, but I felt at ease. I was nervous before. That's why I was praying. But I felt at ease. Somehow, God knew about me, and somehow God would take care of me. I had no clue how. I had no clue. None. But I just had that feeling. Again, the word Jesus never even entered my head. Never in a second did I even think about that. Anyway, so I went to basic training in Fort Dix, New Jersey. And for me, I was there in college. I was basically, the expression a couch potato, okay? Didn't exercise, didn't do anything. So basic training was hard, really hard for me. You were expected to run for miles with full gear, M16, backpack, heavy boots. It was hard, really hard for me. But I made it. But something very interesting happened when I was in basic training. And this plays in a lot to what's going to happen later, what I'm going to tell you. How I became a believer in Yeshua, in Jesus. There in basic training, like I said a moment ago, it was real tough for me. But we had what's called a day room. There was things like foosball machines. You could play, pool. There was a TV and stuff like that. A lot of the trainees, a lot of the guys would go there and just hang out. So I went there. Okay, I went there. And there in that day room, there was a corner of the room. And it had a black curtain, like on a slider bar. That was the corner was sectioned off with this black curtain. I was curious. And what is this? Everything else around it, full of trainees, foosball machines, and whatever. And there was this cordoned off area, and I didn't know what it was. So I went there one night, slid open the black curtain, and there in that corner was nothing except a wooden podium, the kind of thing you would see like in a church. And on that wooden podium was a black book. It was closed, hardcover, closed. And that's it. There were no chairs, there were no tables, no pictures on the walls, zero. Just that podium with that black book closed on it. I said, what is this? What is this? It seems so out of place compared to everything else going on in that day room. There were no signs saying what it was, nothing, zero. So I walked in. Okay, I'm curious. I walked in. I'm not lying when I tell you this. I'm not exaggerating. I walked into that room, that cordoned off area. I'm approaching that wooden podium. Okay? It's just a hardcover book closed on it. I'm approaching it. I'm maybe about 4 feet away. My hand starts trembling, just like this, trembling. I said, what? What's going on? I was fine 3 seconds earlier. And I got closer. I'm walking. I'm about 4 feet away. My hand starts trembling. I'm going closer and closer to that podium. My intent was to put my hand on that book. I didn't know what it was. I was going to put it in. My hand started shaking like this. I couldn't. I was maybe a foot away. Like this. I couldn't hold it. I said, what's going on? I ran out of that room. I ran out. I slid closed that black curtain. I'm just standing there. Hand is trembling. And I'm breathing hard. I said, what's going on? I was so scared. I said, what's going on? After a minute or so, my hand stops trembling. No one noticed me. People are playing games, they're watching TV. There's a lot of noise in there. People are talking, whatever. No one noticed me. And I'm just standing there outside that room. I had no clue. What just happened? I went back into my room. Not a room, my barracks. Okay, there was no room there. I was a trainee. So I went back into my barracks. And I didn't go back into the day room. Next night, I went back into the day room. There, of course, was that cordoned off area. I said, let's do this again. Slid open the black curtain. There was the same thing as last night. Nothing, looked like nothing had changed. The book hadn't moved, still closed on that wooden podium. Again, I approached it. I walked to it. Again, my right hand, stretching, it was just shaking. I couldn't approach that book. Again, I ran out. And I'm breathing hard. Went back in my barracks. Call me a glutton for punishment. The third night, I again did the same thing. This time, though, I said, let me use my left hand. Okay? Instead of my right. Let me do my left. I don't know. So I went there. Again, my left hand started shaking. And my right. Both of them. I'm 1 foot away from that podium, Jack, and I'm trying to put my both hands on that black book, and I couldn't touch it. Both hands are shaking violently. And I ran out. That's the last time I ever went back into that day room. Last time. Two weeks later, basic training ended. I got my orders for what I was going to do after basic. My orders would go to a place called Fort Gordon, Georgia. And rumor had it that, and they wanted to make me an MP, a military policeman, MP. And rumor had it that MPs, more often than not, went to Vietnam. And a lot of MPs were coming back from Vietnam in a coffin. Okay? So I knew that very likely I would go to Nam. So I wasn't happy about that, but what am I going to do? So there I am, standing in front of the bus They're in Fort Dix, New Jersey. They were going to give us 1 month leave to be home, because they knew that once we go to Fort Gordon and wherever other duty station, it'd be a long time before we see our folks. So I'm waiting for the bus to take me back to New York City, where I would go home to be with a month leave to be with my parents. Excuse me. So I'm standing there waiting in line, hundreds of us, well, not just me, and I had my duffel bag there at my feet, my equipment, my uniform, whatever, and all of a sudden, somebody calls out, "Grunhaus, Grunhaus, is there a Grunhaus here?" There aren't too many Grunhauses, okay? I raise my hand. They want you there in the office. Move. Get going, recruit. You don't walk there, you run there. You don't walk as a recruit, you run. So I'm running there. "Are you Grunhaus?" "Yes, yes, sir." "Your orders have changed." I said, "What?" "Your orders have changed." Well, where am I going?" "You're going to a place called Fort Myer in Arlington, Virginia." I said, "Wow, why? And what am I going to do there? Am I going to be training as an MP?" "No, different MOS, military occupational specialty, MOS. It's called 24K20. I said, "What? What is a 24K20? What is that?" They didn't know. Those in the office had no clue what that was. And they didn't know what I would be doing there. And they never even heard of Fort Myer in Arlington. Anyway, I go home. I'm on that bus, Jack, and we're traveling to New York City. And I'm thinking, what just happened? Why did my orders change? And what am I going to do at Fort Myer? I knew what I'd be doing at Fort Gordon. But what about Fort Myer? What is it? I had no clue. None. So I'm home. And I'm walking on the boardwalk again, okay? Praying. Again, I hear another voice in my head. This time it said, and this time it called me by my name. Before it said you. Now it said, "Elie, I will transform you. I will change you." I just stood there. I said, "What? What?" I felt so much at ease again. Because up to that point, I had no clue what was going to happen. Where I was going, what was going to happen to me, I had no idea. I was so confused. But to hear my own name and to hear, "I will transform you, I will change you." I was just stunned. Anyway, eventually I went to Fort Myer. Turns out 24Kilo20 is a statistician. And because of my degree in math, it turns out that I would be working in the Pentagon as a statistician. I mean, what a job, you know? Instead of going to Fort Gordon, Georgia, and very likely going off to Vietnam, I would be working as a statistician. One day, I'm going to move faster here because I know time is important. I tend to ramble on, I guess.
It's fine.
But they had a day room in the barracks where I lived, but it wasn't the same kind of day room as at Fort Dix. There was no cordoned off area or anything like this. There were foosball machines and stuff like that, billiards, TVs, and a lot of people would be there. And one day, they also, I worked in the Pentagon, okay? And when I got back home from the Pentagon, On Tuesday nights, they often had on Fort Myer, they had live bands. And I love to dance. I loved rock and roll at that time. I did the frug, I did the twist, I did all that stuff. And I love to dance. The faster the dance, the louder the music, the better. And I was 23 at the time. And I love to dance. And Tuesday evenings, the live band would come in a different place, not in the day room, but at a dedicated place. And so I'd come home from work. I would go to my room, change out of my army, my army uniform, get into my civvies, my civilian clothes, and go there to the dance hall. So Tuesday night, I come home, and to get to my room, I have to go through the day room. A lot of people were there. This time, there was something unusual in that day room. There were these 6 guys standing in the day room, standing there in a circle with their hands together, clasped together, with their heads bowed, eyes closed. And I was just passing through, but I said, this is so unusual. I said, what are you guys doing? That's what I said. I blurted it out. What are you guys doing? They picked up their heads. The guy that answered my question, I found out later, was a naval chaplain's assistant. He worked there out Fort Myer. There was a chapel, a naval a chapel there, and he was part of the Navy. And his name is Mario Branciforte. To this day, I remember this. Mario Branciforte. He was a little shorter than me, had jet black hair, handlebar mustache, and he answered me. He said, we're praying. I said, what? You're praying? Praying about what? Well, we're praying about talking to people about Christ. I said, oh, I'm Jewish. I'm out of here. I'm going to my room. Goodbye, And he said, well, but as soon as Mario heard that I'm Jewish, he says to me, oh, Jesus is your Messiah. And I don't know why, Jack. I don't know why, but it stopped me. I wanted to go into my room, change. I wanted to go dancing, okay? I didn't care about any of this crap. But it stopped me. I said, what? Jesus? My Messiah? I never heard of such a thing. Never, ever. Certainly not from the rabbis. Certainly not from my parents. And so for the next 2 hours, Mario and I sat in that day room. Other people were around. They were playing foosball, watching TV, whatever. The other 5 guys, part of their group, and by the way, they're called, what are they called? I forget. Well, anyway, they have some organization. And they had scattered to go off to talk to other people. So it was just Mario and I sitting on that couch there in the day room. And he had a Bible in his hand. As soon as he showed me that Bible, it was the exact same book that I had seen in that day room at Fort Dix, New Jersey, several months earlier. At least it looked like it. I never got close enough to that book there at Fort Dix to actually read the cover of it. So I wasn't sure, but it sure looked like it. Exact same dimensions, same black hardcover, and it turns out it was a Revised Standard Version of the Bible, RSV. He put it on his lap. He opened it up, showed me from the Tanakh and the Brit Hadashah, the Old and New Testaments, how Jesus is the Messiah, and on and on. He went on in scripture after scripture talking about Jesus, talking about Yeshua, Jesus. And I just sat there mesmerized. I had never heard of such things. 2 hours passed. And he eventually invited me to go with him off base. He would pick me up in his car and take me to his church in Annapolis, Maryland. And stupid me, I said, sure, Mario, I'll go. But after that, I regretted saying that. I really didn't want to go. But in the emotions of the moment, I said, sure, I'll go. And he handed me that Bible. And it sure looked like the same book I couldn't touch there in Fort Dix, New Jersey. But he gave it to me. This time, my hands did not tremble. I took it into my room, threw it on my bunk bed, immediately changed out of my clothes because I still had about another half hour left where I could do some dancing. I ran out of my barracks, went to that dance hall, and the band never showed up that night. It had been drizzling, it had been raining. They never showed up. I walked out thinking even more about what Mario had told me, well, what we had discussed. Anyway, that was Tuesday. Sunday, the following Sunday, Mario was going to pick me up to take me to his church off base. Mario didn't show up. I was waiting for him. He didn't show up. I said, yay! I kept my part of the bargain. Mario didn't. I really didn't want to go. I said, I don't have a guilty conscience. I kept my word. Mario didn't. Ha ha. I'm free. Wrong. Mario called the place where I was waiting for him. I was waiting for him in the mess hall. And Mario called, say that he had car trouble. He borrowed a friend's car, and he would be right over in just 5 minutes. So I was committed. I went with him. But the people I met there in his church were so different than anything I'd ever seen. I'd never been in a church, ever. I've been in synagogues, of course, but never in church. And the people there in that church were so loving, so friendly. Nobody was pushy. Nobody tried to ram the Bible down my throat or anything like this. Not even Mario. And I kept going with him to that church, and I kept reading that Bible. And the more I read, the more, I guess the church word is convicted. I became more and more. See, my problem, Jack, was that I thought I was a really good person. I mean, I'd never raped anyone. I'd never murdered anyone. I never deliberately tried to hurt anybody. Ever. So I thought I was a pretty good person. Yeah, I damned God every now and then. Yeah, I curse a lot. Far Rockaway, I said, is a lovely spot, but it was a dangerous neighborhood. Okay? I grew up there as a teenager. I had a switchblade in my back pocket. I get into a lot of fights, a lot of curse words, an awful lot. It's just the way where I grew up. And even to this day, sometimes it's hard for me to get that curse mentality out of my mind. Okay? Sort of a ghetto mentality, street mentality out of my mind. But God's working on me on that. And he's cleaned up my act a lot. But I grew up that way. But I was so enthralled by what I read in that Bible and what people were sharing with me. And I saw the love and the genuineness of the people there. And I felt more and more that I'm not really so good as I thought I was. You know, the Bible says that the word will convict you. It did. It did. And one day, this is about a month and a half after I met Mario. One day, I was there in my barracks. It was a Saturday morning, 1:30 in the morning. 1:30, I know because I saw the clock. I was there in my room. I had 2 roommates. They were out. It was a Saturday night. They were out and about. I was there in the room by myself. And Mario had given me a gospel track. This is like a month earlier. You probably have seen these tracks. It's called 4 Spiritual Laws. Okay, very popular gospel track. I had read it before. It didn't mean much to me. But this time, after having read the Bible since that time and been in Mario's church, I picked it up again and I read it. I said, wow. In Revelation chapter 3, verse 20, it says, Jesus is talking there. And he says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and will dine with him, and he with me. And I didn't understand what it meant to dine with him and he with me. What does that mean? And people explained to me that it meant a close relationship with God. It wasn't just plain church. It wasn't just reading the Bible and memorizing scripture. It was far more than that. Or wearing a cross. Or even trying to be a good person. It was a personal relationship with God. And I said, you know, I want that. I want that. I didn't want that a month and a half earlier, but I want that. After what I saw among those Christians there in Mario's church, I want that. And I met Christians there in the barracks too. They came out of the woodwork, so to speak. I met them. And they were different than the other people I knew, other people I saw there. I said, I want that. But it was 1:30 in the morning, Jack. I'm tired, okay? I want to go to bed. So part of me said, no, forget about this. Forget about it. Think about it tomorrow. Another part of me said, no. I need to make a decision. I went out of my room. I don't know why I did this, because no one was in my room. I could have stayed there in my room. I went out of my room, went like about 5 feet away was the latrine, the bathroom. I went there. There was no one there. It was 1:30 in the morning. And I went there, and in front of a sink, that sink, I mean, it was filthy, okay? Just filth in that sink. I was there in my underwear, standing in front of that filthy sink. There was a prayer in the back of that 4 Spiritual Laws tract. I didn't even read it. I didn't read it. I just bowed my head and I said, God, I want you. I know I'm not good. I know I've done wrong. Come into my life, Jesus. Teach me about the Holy Spirit. Amen. That was it. Took me maybe a minute, if that. I'm telling you. After I standing there in front of that sink, I felt such like this giant weight was taken off of me. I felt so light. I didn't go back into my room. I floated into my room. And I had this mad urge to jot down exactly what I had just written. And there was a stubby pencil there on a desk near my bunk bed. I just jotted it down, the exact words. And I immediately went into my bed and fell asleep, instantly. The next morning, Saturday morning, lovely day, got up, didn't think once about what I had done. Nothing. My roommates were gone. I got up, got dressed, went to the mess hall, ate breakfast. I decided to go off, it was Saturday, decided to go off on my bicycle, and I biked off to Washington, D.C., which is maybe about, 6 miles away, 5-6 miles. And so I went across the Thomas Jefferson Memorial Bridge, which connects Virginia to D.C., and I just spent the day touring the monuments there, D.C., and so on. Came back towards dinner time, ate there in the mess hall, came back to my room, sat myself down on my bunk bed, and I said, I had a fantastic day today. Awesome. Beautiful day. Weather was great. And suddenly it occurred to me, oh, I asked Jesus into my life. Is that why I'm feeling so good? I didn't know. Is that why? And from that point on, I began reading that Bible that Mario had given me, that RSV Bible, more and more and more. And I remember calling Mario. And I said to him, are you going to pick me up at church? Pick me up to go to your church? And Mario said, yeah, I'll pick you up. So we're there in his car. We're going 60, 65 miles an hour on the interstate to go to Annapolis, Maryland, where his church is. I'm in the passenger seat, and he's driving. And I say to him, Mario, last night I asked Jesus into my life. Mario took his hands off the steering wheel and he reached over and he hugged me. And we're going 65 miles an hour. I'm there staring through the windshield. What? What are you doing? And he hugged me. It was just so awesome. And from that point on, my education, you might say, my growth in Yeshua and Jesus began. And just a little bit more. I know it's getting late, but I need to share this one more thing. A lot happened after that. Awful lot. And God showed me how real he is. I wanted to share Jesus with so many people. I had this mad desire to share Jesus with so many people, okay? But the most people, and I did. Around the barracks, I did. People got sick of me. I was doing it so much. But more than anything, I wanted to share Jesus with my family, my parents, my brother, his wife. I went home several months later, okay, during Yom Kippur. And my parents found out that I was a believer. How they found out is another story. I don't want to belabor it. The point is that they found out. They went absolutely crazy. They went ballistic. They basically almost threw me out of the house. I mean, if I wanted to die, I wanted to joke and die. It was absolutely terrible. Absolutely terrible. And they called me a meshchomed, which is Hebrew for traitor to the Jewish. My father said, If you're going to believe in God, at least believe in the Jewish God. Don't believe in this garbage about Jesus. Don't believe that. That's horrible. Because during World War II, there were many people who said they were Christians. They said they were Christians. But they acted more like they were Nazis than they were Christians, okay? They were not very nice people. And these are Christians? These are people who love God? Really? That's how my parents looked at it. And their own son is now turning to the very thing that elicited hate to Jews? What kind of a traitor am I? This is their son? Can you imagine? I mean, it's just horrendous. I walked again on that boardwalk praying. This time, I knew Jesus. I said, Lord, help me. Help me. I don't know what to do. I did know what to do. The easy way. I could have just gone home to my parents and said, Mama, Papa, I was stupid. I was fooled. See this Bible? I had a little Gideon's Bible with me. I took it home with me. See this Bible? Throw it away in the trash. I'll never touch Jesus. I'll never touch anything to do with Jesus ever again. I knew that if I said that to my mama and my papa, everything would be right. Everything would be fine. Simple, easy. I could have done it. But in my heart, I knew I shouldn't do that. I knew I cannot do that. So I was in a dilemma between a rock and a hard place. I didn't know what to do. I was praying and praying, Lord, help me, help me. I was in tears. I was literally walking, tears were going down my face. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do. I was there on that boardwalk maybe 2.5 hours, maybe 3, I don't know. I came home. Where am I going to go? I came home. In those 2.5, 3 hours, Jack, God moved. I went home. And what I didn't know was that the mail came between the time I left to walk the beach after my parents basically threw me out to the time I came home. The mail came. When I walked in that door, my father was there like this. And he had in his hand, he was shaking it in my face, this letter. And the letter was addressed to my parents. Not Mr. and Mrs. Grunhaus, but Mr. and Mrs. Morris Grunhaus. Their first names, Morris and Anna Grunhaus. And in that letter, in that envelope rather, there was no letter per se. It was just a gospel tract. Just a gospel tract. It talked about Jesus. It talked about how Jesus was our Messiah, how he was the Lamb of God, and on and on. And my father was furious. He said, "Who sent this? You sent this, didn't you, Elie? You sent this." I had no clue. It wasn't me. I didn't do a thing. I looked at the return address. I want to know who sent. There was no return address. Nothing. It was just my parents' address. With their first names, Morris and Anna Grunhaus. Who knew? I didn't share it with anybody. How would anyone know my parents' names, let alone my address? The timing of this was so perfect. Absolutely perfect. I looked at it. My father took it, he ripped it up, threw it at my feet, and stalked off. He was angry as anything. My mother was like this, want to look at me. But I picked up the pieces off the floor. I walked up to my room, my bedroom, to my parents' home, walked up to my bedroom, closed the door, went on my knees in front of my bed, and I was crying. But I wasn't crying because I was sad. I was crying for happiness, for joy. I felt God had answered my prayer. My parents didn't care about Jesus. My parents, it wasn't for them. It was for me. It was for me. God showed me that he was aware of me. He knew me. He knew what was going on. And he changed me. It's like my trust in Yeshua became even more stronger after that terrible encounter with my parents. Became even stronger because I knew that God had kept his word. God not only knew me, but what he shared with me on that boardwalk, when he said to me, this is before I went to Fort Myer in Arlington, Virginia, to work in the Pentagon. He said, Elie, I will transform you. I will change you. He kept his word. And I was changed. I was changed when I accepted Yeshua, okay, in front of that latrine sink. But I was changed even more after that. My parents still didn't like me. They still hated what I had become. Nothing changed there. But I went on that bus back to Fort Myer in Arlington, Virginia, about a 6-hour trip. And I was there in that bus, and I was just praying. And I was thanking God. I said, thank you, Lord. Thank you for answering my prayer. Thank you. I went home. I went home, went back to the barracks, called up my parents. I said, I came home safely to Virginia, just to let them know. I expected my father and mother to be, again, real angry, didn't want to talk to me. But this time, they were softer. This time, I guess they had a chance to think about it or whatever. I don't know, but they were softer. And from that point on, even though I spoke to them about the Lord, they weren't so angry anymore. They were not. And things got a lot better. Anyway, I guess that's about, there's a lot more to share. I don't know if you want me to go into it. God showed me so many things about how real he is, and he showed me definitively that he's more than just, he's not just a figment of my imagination. He was real. He is real. And he has been with me and with my wife, ever since. Ever since that September of 1973. I guess the most important lesson, the most important thing for me, now that I'm looking back at everything, is that my most important thing for me is I want very much to be the expression I used in a sermon I gave here at church not long ago about wisdom. I want to have the letters TKK after my name, the King's Kid. That's what I want. When I die, when people see my gravestone, I want to see the letters. I'd like to see the letters TKK on it, the King's Kid. I want to live in such a way that God would be pleased with me. I think that's the most important thing that I can take away from my earthly life. I want to be the King's Kid in how I act, how I speak, how I even think, what I think about, what I'm dwelling, what I'm looking at on the web or looking at on TV or reading or stuff like that. I want that. Why? Because God has shown himself so real to me. So real that I don't want to disappoint. I want to do everything to please him. That's my modus operandi. That's what I'm living for. And that's the biggest lesson for me, to do that.